third panel today is focusing on living with inherited cancer in the Jewish community. My name is Talia Scheinberg. I'm a medical oncologist here at Lifehouse, and I treat prostate cancer and gynecological cancers. We have a fantastic panel here to speak. I'm going to get everybody to introduce themselves.
Sorry, I don't know if Robin told you, but I'm just doing a quick commitment. So
Please
words.
do.
I'm so sorry. So I was actually supposed to speak at them, but I do have a flight back to Melbourne, and I'm just a little nervous, and I know we've got a bit over, so sorry. I'm so sorry, Talia, to butt in. I just wanted to say a few thanks, Chris O'Brien, Lifehouse, of course, for letting us use this amazing room. The Walper Jewish Hospital Health Foundation, who gave us the grant for this day. It's really, really grateful, and we're lucky to have Leslie here and Bib, who are part of that, so thank you so much. Also, thank my team, as usual, who worked really hard to put these events on, and all of the speakers that came today. Super, super grateful for you giving up your Sundays to come and help us out. And also everyone who actually, who's here, the people that this is helping. Most of you, there's not many people left now, but most of you know that I also am part of this community. I have a BRCA1 mutation. I actually have one of the Jewish founder mutations, and was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I know how important these days are, and I really wish there was something like this when I found out. So, and I'm really pleased that it's being filmed today, because there's just so much great information. A few things that I just wanted to touch on that I've been listening to. We also had a community catch up last night, and listening to what people were talking about, listening to the questions today. And one of the hardest things, I think, being living with inherited risk is the decision making. We talk a lot about, as an organisation, we want people to make informed decisions, because there is no right or wrong decision, and but as long as you have all the information to make the decision that's right for you. But someone said to me last night, I know that's great, but sometimes I wish someone would just tell me what to do. And that's the hardest thing, it's, you do have to make that decision that's right for you when it's right for you. So really recognise that. The family dynamics, we've talked a lot about that. Every family's different, how we approach it, how we talk to our children, they can be very challenging. So it was great. There was lots of talk about that today. And the generational aspects of this and the ongoing, Naomi kind of touched on this, but I call it the roller coaster. Sometimes you're on that low and everything's fine, and it isn't defining you. You're just getting on with the rest of your life, and then you're sort of back up on top of the roller coaster for whatever reason it is. You're having more surgery, one of your children's having testing, you've got to have a conversation with someone in the family. So it very much is an ongoing roller coaster. And the other thing is, a lot of conversations, I find people in the community, particularly those who haven't had a cancer diagnosis, often minimise their experience, because they're like, well, I was lucky I didn't get cancer, and I always say it's all relative. We're all experiencing it ourselves, often going through surgeries, going through treatment, and that's why often this community can feel a little bit invisible, in the health world, I guess, because we don't have cancer, some of us, but we're trying not to get cancer, and that can be very difficult to go through as well. So I just wanted to touch on those things. I'm really glad that they've been spoken about today. And lastly, Robin will do all this at the end, but we will send a survey out. It's really great if we can get feedback. It does help us to get future funding to show the impacts of what we do. Hopefully Robin's slide will work. I don't know if anyone saw how many tabs Robin had open on her computer, so that might have had something to do with it, but yeah, just going to dob Robin in for that. But yeah, so that would be really great. But yeah, thanks everyone, and enjoy the next panel.
Thank you. So I'm going to get everybody to go down the line, introduce themselves, and say a little bit about what their role is from a professional side of things.
I'm just holding this because it was on my chair. I think you were all here this morning, so I don't really need to reintroduce myself. Thank you.
Same here.
So I'm Tanya DeWart. I'm one of the genetic counsellors at Prince of Wales Hospital and also St Vincent's Hospital. And I am meeting everyone for the first time right now. So thank you for having me.
My name is Justine Sageman. I'm the CEO of the Australian Jewish Fertility Network.
So interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say about the intersection of fertility and inherited cancer.
I'm Nicola Tkachenko, and I also work for the Australian Jewish Fertility Network. I'm a support coordinator, so I am the point of contact that people would reach out to, and I'm trying to support people often who contact us having found genetic information and trying to decide how to move forward on their fertility journeys.
All right, I might address the first question to Leslie. So can you explain what a founder variant is and how someone in the Jewish community could access testing?
So one of the first things is that I think it's really important to dispel the myth that people of Jewish ancestry have more gene faults than anyone else. And that's sometimes the perception when we talk about Jewish founder mutations. And when we're thinking about it either in the BRCA space or in the TASAC space. And the reality is that particularly Jews who have Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, it was probably most Ashkenazim descended from about 350 families. And so it's like a large family that shares a lot of the same genes, but there's a whole lot of other genetic disorders that are almost unheard of amongst people of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. So it's not so much that Ashkenazi Jews have more gene faults than anyone else, they just tend to be more likely to have the same ones. And so from this founder population of 350 families in Eastern Europe in the Middle Ages, that genetic background meant that they probably didn't have the same diversity because it was a small bottleneck of population that then rapidly expanded, that the same gene changes have been passed down from generation to generation. And it is, when I look at all the families that I've identified over the last 25 years at Prince of Wales, when the Jewish families that have a different fault in BRCA1 or BRCA2, not one of the three founder mutations, are actually quite uncommon. Now, the founder mutations, the BRCA1 gene fault that you might have heard of, 185-DELAG, that was renamed when they started counting from the beginning rather than the end of the little lot of AGs, is basically been found in all Jewish communities. It's been present for probably around 2,000 years. It's not just in the Ashkenazim. The other fault that we find in BRCA1 is one that is actually very common amongst all European populations, especially populations. It's the most common gene fault of BRCA1 found in Poland, for example, amongst all of the community. And that was introduced into the Ashkenazi Jewish community in the Middle Ages and is a much more recent gene fault, probably originated in Scandinavia or Russia, and is more confined to people of European background. And then the BRCA2 Jewish founder mutation did arise, or probably almost certainly arose in the Ashkenazi population in the Middle Ages, somewhere around then, and is pretty much only found in people who are aware of having Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. So it doesn't mean that if you're Jewish, you can't have any other fault of BRCA1 or BRCA2, but you're much less likely to.
And how would someone access testing or watch it coming in the community?
So originally, when the higher prevalence of these gene faults was found in the Jewish community, the criteria for testing was anyone of Jewish ancestry who had hit a diagnosis of breast cancer under 50 or ovarian cancer. Gradually, we've recognized that they're not, I actually wrote my master's thesis on it, saying family history is an unreliable indicator of carrying genetic mutations. And the same holds today, that we can't just rely on family history, and that now there is a population screening program run by Walper Hospital where anyone who has a just one Jewish grandparent can have free testing for the 3 Jewish founder mutations. Now, one of the things that would be really good to come out of today is that amongst people you know who don't have or haven't had any kind of genetic testing, if you would encourage them to think about, could they have a BRCA gene fault in their family without knowing about it? And the typical person would be a male who has inherited it from his father, whose father only had brothers, or God forbid, whose family perished in the Holocaust and they've got no family history to know about. And so it's really important for men to be tested for the Jewish founder mutations, because they're the ones that carry it and don't know until, God forbid, their daughter is diagnosed with cancer. So there are lots of brochures. So a big plug for Walper. Please, anyone of Jewish ancestry, male or female, can be tested for those 3 gene faults at no cost through a self-collected cheek swab that we mail out to you.
Fantastic. So moving on maybe to Tanya, once someone has been diagnosed, can you talk us through the journey that they would go on?
As in when they've been diagnosed with a gene variant? So as a genetic counsellor, my very role exists to help people understand what carrying a gene variant means for them, what it might mean for their future health, what it might mean for other family members, and importantly, to support them to adjust to learning that information and to use that information to make informed decision making. And for every single person, that is a different conversation. It is a different set of choices. It is a different set of considerations. So as a genetic counsellor, I provide that individual with a safe space to talk through the different impacts that are relevant for them and to hopefully help support them to make those often quite difficult decisions, or decisions that have, conflicting kind of emotions behind it. I always try to make myself as available as possible, and we often will have a couple of different conversations. The first is at the time of arranging genetic testing, so to really help them understand all of the potential benefits, all of the potential limitations, the potential consequences of a genetic test, and what it might mean for them if they, do carry a gene variant, and importantly, what it might mean if they don't. Obviously, if we're thinking specifically around, BRCA1 or BRCA2, we know that for females particularly, learning about a gene variant then does set off a list of quite, challenging choices in terms of what they then do moving forward. I always try to focus on how we can use this information to keep people safe. So I never use the words good news, bad news. I use it as powerful news or powerful information that can help a person be more proactive or feel more empowered to make those choices. And so, as I said, I provide them a chance to really talk through, hopefully openly and honestly, to really consider what are the right choices for them. And for some women, that might be just narrowing down that conversation to what's going to be the choices in the next 2 or 3 years. Not thinking about all the way to age 80, but what's important. Is children on the cards? Are people planning careers or planning travel? How do we actually navigate what they might need to do from a screening perspective whilst they're still going off and living all of their lives? And then if a woman does want to start talking through options like risk-reducing or preventative surgeries, then we start to form a pathway for what might that timeline be like for them, and what are the different things that I can do alongside a doctor to sort of provide the relevant information or the relevant referrals for things like that to take place.
Fantastic. I'm very happy to open up the floor to any questions at any time. Otherwise, I'm going to keep pressing on. There's no many questions. All right. So taking this...
I think there was a question.
Oh, there was a question. Sorry, I missed that. Yes.
can a person from outside Sydney access the WOB free testing for the ICA?
Yes, through in New South Wales. We don't have the resources to provide funding for the whole of the country, unfortunately.
So you don't accept saliva from the chiefs of Jews in Melbourne?
Unfortunately, no. They've got to find their own money.
And also to be clear, if someone has a known fault in the family, they can access testing locally, not through the gene screening program. Right, any other questions? All right, we might move on to AJFN and some of the specific issues or concerns that may come up for people in the Jewish community once they have been diagnosed with that gene fault.
So I can speak sort of generally, but I think, Nikki, you're probably more qualified to speak about the beneficiary experience. From a sort of a top level, we partner in New South Wales with WALPA and always refer people to WALPA for genetic testing wherever they are on their journey. In Melbourne, we partner with Eugene, which is also a genetic testing service run by Zoe Milgram. And our message, similar to what you've said, is along the lines of knowledge is power. The more you know, the better you will be able to make decisions. Our position always is we do not judge. Every story is individual, every circumstance is unique, and our job is simply to help people make appropriate decisions for themselves where they are in their lives. People generally come to us, you know, when they're thinking about having children, and they need to make decisions around their fertility in light of a knowledge that they might have about their genetics. And I think, you know, sort of we have a companion program, Naomi, which you referred to in the context of inherited cancers, and I might get Nikki to talk about the benefits of that in the context of fertility journeys.
So maybe I'll just start by giving an overview of what we at the AJFN generally provide. We offer some means-tested financial support for people going on fertility journey with IVF and related treatments. We also, on the emotional side, have a companion program, a peer companion program. So this comprises of a group of people who have had some training to be a companion. They're not professional psychologists. They've all had their own fertility journeys, and we try and pair people who are interested with someone that's not a friends and family, not a professional relationship. Sometimes it can be a one-off conversation. Sometimes it can continue through. If people are going through fertility treatment, they can have meals delivered. We can make referrals to psychologists, to acupuncturists or allied health professionals. If people want to be connected on a spiritual front, we can also make those introductions. If you also qualify for financial support, we can actually also contribute towards some psychology or counselling sessions as well. So that's what we do across the board, and that's for fertility treatment and also for the miscarriage and loss. So obviously from the perspective of today, when people contact either Jess, who is in Melbourne, or myself, they normally come from two different avenues. There's those that have known for some time that they carry a gene, and then there are those that they are in shock because it never occurred to them that they would be carrying a gene, and they've been responsible enough to go and get tested. So, you know, like Justine said, we don't judge. Everyone is different, and it's not my role to influence anyone's decision. I'm really there to hold space, and often when they call me, they're confused, they're overwhelmed, they're devastated, they're frightened, for a variety of different reasons. So often that first port of call would be, and this is a big one, do I let this influence my decision? Do I have my children naturally? You know, maybe it'd be hard enough to get pregnant anyway. Do I need to add another layer? Or there are people like, I know that I carry this gene. I know I do not want to pass it on. And there's things in life I can't control, but this one I have some influence over. And both are valid, you know, and I've spoken to some people who have said, if there had been testing when my parents were trying to have me, I wouldn't be alive here today. And I don't feel that that is my role to play. Medicine will be different in 20 years, all of these things. And some people who have experienced cancer already themselves and are very definitive about, I do not want my child to knowingly possibly have to go through this. So, you know, there's a variety of different factors when thinking about IVF. So there's that original decision, do I want to pursue IVF and do genetic testing? And for that, it really comes down to, if they are going to do that, how do we support them? We were, our founder really was that no Jewish person should walk the path of fertility alone. So our aim is just to support people where we find them. So when making those decisions, if it's relevant, we can offer financial support for IVF and for the PGT testing and other testing of the embryos, obviously, before. And then we can help them along that journey, offering them emotional support, psychological support. There's also educational resources on our website. Some people may want support in making those decisions on top of the support that they've had through a genetic counsellor. So again, we have a network of people that we can refer to who have expertise in this area. So those are really the issues that come up for us, and really just communicating and being there for people to talk about their feelings without judgment. And nothing's right, nothing's wrong, and really being able to filter them through to the most effective avenues of support.
Can you talk us through some of the anyone on the panel, but some of the cultural or religiously sensitive approaches to IVF?
It's a really big question. Where do I start? So for an observant, religious, Orthodox family, and we specifically use the word family and not couple, because we see an increasing number of single women who want to pursue paths towards parenthood. There is a process which in some states is called kosher IVF and in other states is called IVF with supervision. And that is basically where you would have a third party in the room who would observe the entire process and make sure that the right sperm is meeting the right egg, is meeting the right carrier. And that is a process that is organised by the Beth Din, or the Jewish court, in New South Wales or in Victoria, and I'm assuming there is equivalent in Perth, but we've never encountered a situation yet where we have to manage that. Often that can be a very reassuring third party in the room. It's just a presence, really. For many people, that is a comforting thing. The people who do this, the mashgichim, we call them, the observers, they are volunteers. They will often go so above and beyond to facilitate this process that it is quite astounding. If the procedure has to happen on the Sabbath, on a Shabbat, or on a Jewish festival, they will sometimes land up walking 2 or 3 hours to get to the lab at the appropriate time, to sit for the entire day, to wait until the procedure is done, to follow it all the way through to the end. They're a particularly special group of humans. There is also an additional layer of collection of sperm, which has to be done in a religiously appropriate way. Anybody who wants to know more about that, happy to refer you on to the person who can give you that information. So there are nuances at every level. For single women, it is often very challenging because there is a community perception in the Orthodox community that it's maybe not appropriate. So we actually have an incredible person that we've helped to work very closely with Rabbi Ullman to kind of jump through all the hoops along the journey so that she could be a mum, and her daughter Liel is 18 months, almost 2, I think. She must be 2. So, it's really about finding out where people are culturally, religiously, emotionally, and making sure that they have the tools at the ready to help them take the next step on their journey. And because we're an apolitical
a religious organization, we can really refer people to whatever spiritual counsel they need, no matter where they sit on the religious spectrum. But I imagine others might have what to contribute in this space. So I'm happy to hand over the microphone. If anybody else on the panel wants to add.
About kosher IVF?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would see it from a totally different perspective to me.
I've had Rabbi Ullman
You've had
in
Rabbi
the room
Ullman.
with me. I've had Sally Ann with
Yeah.
me many times. We get to know them quite well. And an embryologist who's new to the kosher IVF, they might get a bit offended.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? You think I'm going to put the wrong sperm with the wrong eggs? But we appreciate that it's about more than just that.
And most labs in the major clinics are familiar with, having a third party in the room for this purpose.
But I'm thinking about Jewish community, and Leslie, listening to you, I talk about the Jews swimming in a very shallow gene pool.
That's true.
Not a lot of depth. And one thing I didn't say this morning, I had a second cousin who was a lawyer with the American Civil Liberties Union, and she actually argued the Myriad case in front of the Supreme Court of the U.S. You may not be aware, gosh, it must be 15, 20 years ago. Myriad was the company that first sequenced the BRCA genes, and for years they had a patent on it. So if you wanted to be tested, you had to pay Myriad a fee.
Right.
Yeah, so Lenora got our genes back.
And that's where there's a lot of still misconception amongst GPs as well as the general population that if you want a gene test, you have to pay at least $2,000 or $2,500. And even if you don't have a family history and you choose to pay privately, if your testing is not covered by Medicare or not covered by a clinic, the costs today are nowhere near that. But if there's a significant family history, if someone has one of the relevant cancers, if you have someone in the family with the gene fault, all of that will be covered by a clinic and using Medicare or by the clinic funding. So it is very rare that people would have to pay $2,000 for genetic testing in Australia. What's the biggest panel that's offered? It's probably is it 1,300? I think is the most you would have to pay for a cancer panel.
Any questions? Yes.
I'm just wondering how the Orthodox Jewish community helps with selection of embryos.
For what purpose?
If there's a bracket situation and you want to select out embryos.
I've never had a rabbi tell me that's not okay. Doesn't mean it's, that there aren't rabbis who would have problems with that, but I've certainly never had the experience where a rabbi has said, in order to guarantee the health and well-being of future child, you wouldn't make certain difficult decisions.
Yeah, I think that people think, religion, so therefore you can't do this. Definitely not the case, and Jews are not Catholics when it comes to this. And I remember years ago, think about you working at Vinnie's, I sat on a panel for the young Garvin about doing PGT. And at that time, Bernadette Tobin, she was Tony Abbott's pick to be the chair of the Australian Health Ethics Committee. She was a former nun and would not consider PGT because you had to do IVF to do PGT, and therefore you couldn't even contemplate it. So I'm just wondering, are they still restrictive at Vinnie's? Can you talk to patients about PGT?
I can.
You can.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never been told that there are things that I can't talk about. Certainly from a genetic counselling perspective, we have very open conversations about supporting whatever reproductive choices an individual is going to make. I always start my conversation with, now you can choose to do nothing differently, conceive naturally, have your children. And in most of the scenarios, these gene variants are only going to have relevance for children in adulthood, where we have, potentially 2 more decades worth of medical advancements and genetic advancements before we're even going to need to consider doing further testing for your children. I obviously do talk about IVF and PGT. I also talk about broader preconception carrier screening, even though I am a genetic counsellor that primarily works in cancer genetics. That's where my professional experience is in. But if a person is of reproductive age, it is also my job to provide additional information so that they have an awareness of different things that could help them make decisions regarding their future reproductive choices. And at the end of the day, like every conversation, it is about that individual's personal beliefs or values. It is about what their cultural needs may be. My role is purely to let them know that they have a range of different choices, and ultimately they then decide what is the right choice for them. And that is the case even, with my role through St Vincent's, as well as it would be at Prince of Wales.
I was just going to say that, the Jewish religion, unlike Catholicism, where there's a pope that is, the
Infallible.
yeah, that makes a lot of rules, is that there are rabbis of different persuasions. And I think that there are those rabbis who are more broad-minded, and there can still be orthodox rabbis. And I have no doubts that there are rabbis who are not supportive of IVF and preimplantation genetic testing. But certainly I haven't encountered any of that attitude in Sydney. And as you said, Rabbi Ullman is very supportive of women or couples, individuals going through the process.
Well, IVF is free in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, free up to a certain age and until you have 2 children. And so as many rounds as you need, and I can't remember whether it's 42 or 43 or 45, whatever the age.
Oh, the age.
The age of cycles. No, not cycles. As many cycles as you need until you have 2 children. And we actually do have some single women that we know who move to Israel in order to take advantage of that. They will become residents and have their children, live in Israel for a couple of years, and then come back to Australia. So very, very interesting.
I've actually had a couple of calls since I've been working for the AJPEN of people from different religions and backgrounds, and they have been told no to IVF, no to genetic testing, and also what happens if you have embryos and then you don't use them, and that brings up some ethical questions.
I asked you this question once.
Yeah. So at least 2 people I've had conversations with who have come from different religions but have been respectful of Jewish traditions and beliefs, and they really wanted to have an understanding of how the Jewish community thought about this, because it really informed their decisions as well. So, the emphasis is always on life, and our general experience is that preservation of life and continuance of life kind of trumps most things.
And I will just add, we're very lucky in Sydney that we have Rabbi Ullman, who is acknowledged as a world expert in the intersection of Jewish law and all things fertility related. He's very, very approachable, and we have a really great working relationship with him. So,
He's got a YouTube channel.
Do you want to talk to the question of what do you do with your embryos? because that for me was really fascinating. I mean, it's not a cancer topic, but it's
Right, what to do with when you've completed your family, you still
yeah,
have
and you still have
embryos.
embryos, like from a religious perspective.
Yeah, well, people feel quite differently about what embryos represent. I mean, an embryo has no hope of becoming a baby unless it's actually transferred to a uterus. So, like, I don't think of embryos as babies, but some people feel quite attached to them. Options there would be discarding them. We have occasionally done what we call compassionate transfer. So transferring the embryos into the woman's uterus at a time when we know they won't implant. Some people have taken their embryos home for burial. Made jewelry with them. I know. It's hard for me as a bit of a scientific background to think about that. But that's what, it's about meeting people where they are, as you say. So that's what we try to do.
And donating, a few people donate.
You could donate your embryos to another couple. That's challenging, I think, though, because those are full siblings
Yes.
going to another family, and quite random which embryos ended up with which family. Yeah.
Just wonderful. Does it cost to have a supervisor in the process? And so do they just volunteer their time to do that?
They volunteer their time. It does not cost. Yeah, they're just incredible, just really special people. Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to know about what are some of how can individuals balance faith, medical decision making when considering their genetic testing or reproductive options?
There's no one size fits all. I think, for all of us who work in different aspects of this space, there really is no one answer that you can just roll out for everybody. And the doctors in the room would know it's really about finding out who is the person that you're dealing with and trying to advise, and what is going to work best for them. Some people really want to talk to a spiritual advisor or a rabbi and get guidance, and other people are like, I don't want to know because it's just going to confuse me even more, and there's enough to deal with. So it's about making sure that you put enough options on the table, you inform people, you tell them what's out there and let them make their choices. And I know, for me personally, I actually can't imagine how hard that would be to have a rabbi telling you one thing and a doctor telling you something that might not match what the rabbi is telling you. And then as an observant person, who believes in God, how do you choose who you're going to follow? There is actually an organization that has sprouted out of this very conundrum, and a rabbi who's made it his job to translate rabbinic advice into medical language so that there can be an open dialogue between the medical field or professional and the rabbinic council. And we work with this organisation as well. They're a global organisation and they have representatives here in Sydney and in Melbourne. They provide a very important service for people who need it, but it is not for everybody.
It might be come as a surprise, but when the BRCA1 and 2 gene faults were, or the genes were identified in the mid-1990s, and the concept of risk-reducing mastectomy and risk-reducing oophorectomy was raised at a sort of a broader level, the thought of that type of surgery was often referred to by really destructive terminology, particularly amongst a predominantly male healthcare profession, and very aggressively often in Israel. It was very paternalistic, and there was a lot of objection to even thinking, and I'm going back to 1998 to 2000 when I was started working in this field. And so when I started at Prince of Wales with a study then, which was identify or testing Jewish women who had breast or ovarian cancer, I went to a number of rabbis of different representation across the Jewish community. And even at the most orthodox level at that time, from the Beth Din, was the view that in order to preserve a woman's life, that is the most important thing. The guidance was that they would be more supportive of surgery after the woman had had 2 children at least, to not to remove ovaries until at least you've replaced the 2 Jewish parents with 2 Jewish children. And it I think the Jewish view has even back then been in Australia, in our community, has been it's about the health of the woman and the well-being of the woman. And that now there is, I don't think it even comes into the conversation that risk-reducing surgery is justified. But that was not the case in 2000. And the rabbis that I approached in Sydney were quite supportive even back then, but with that caveat that they really were encouraging women to complete their families, obviously, before they embarked on surgery.
We've come a long way.
Yeah.
So we heard earlier today Naomi give her fascinating and really heartfelt personal account. You spoke about some of the feelings that people going through the process may have of guilt, of stigma, responsibility to their family members. What supports are available in the communities of people going through this?
So from within the community, the Australian Jewish Fertility Network was founded specifically to help people navigate these journeys. And we are continuously evolving and pivoting to provide new services to meet people with whatever circumstances and situations they find themselves. I think from, Nikki, you can probably talk more to this, but from what we have seen is that the power of a companion network, of someone who sits outside of your immediate circle, who can really hold space for you and be there, who has had some lived experience of what you are experiencing, that is the most powerful support service that we can give people. A lot of people don't feel comfortable talking to their family. They don't want to talk to their friends. It's very confronting when you're facing these major life decisions and everybody around you is falling pregnant and having children and basking in the glow of motherhood, and you might not have told your parents that you've got this news about your genes, or that you're facing these major decisions. And so we find that having this external companion who can just hold space for you and be there for you to scream at or to cry with, or to just someone you can say, I'm going for a procedure, or I'm having this big thing today, and there's nobody else that I can talk to, that goes a really long way to helping people feel less alone, which is essentially our mission. You might be able to add.
Yes, I think there are obviously people that know other people who have had the experience, but I find even if I just pick up the phone and can listen and say, where's the effect, although as compassionately as I can, you are not the only person I have this conversation with. At the moment, you may feel like, everyone else is carrying on their business and your world has stood still, but you are not alone. And there are organizations, there are people that can support you. And yes, life throws you these curveballs, but we're just going to put one foot in front of the other. And I can link you up with various different people. I should say, on top of just the shock or the realization, a lot people use IVF as a term all the time, but lots of people don't really know what that means. They don't really understand what the process of IVF is or the genetic testing. And then on top of that, sometimes there are people who are realizing that they are possibly up against a massive financial hurdle, which they hadn't seen coming, they hadn't planned for. And that can be just as overwhelming, especially if you don't have family financial support. So I think I mentioned before, we do have some financial assistance available, which is means tested. And that can also extend to the genetic testing of embryos. So that can sometimes take a huge pressure off people who are already trying to deal with the emotional side. And also people who find communication difficult. We work with some incredible psychologists and counselors who sometimes people can sit down as a family with. I don't know how much that overlaps with what you guys do.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the person in front of me at any given moment is the person that I'm mainly focused on at that point in time, and a big part of me supporting that individual through the process of genetic testing or making medical decisions based on their results is to be an immediate point of contact, an immediate point of support, but to also recognize when they may need referral on to other services. If it is a patient who has been diagnosed with a cancer, it could be that we get social work involved or psychology through the hospital. For other individuals, it's harder to access inpatient-based hospital services, but private-based psychology or mental health care plans are things that we can certainly refer people to. For a lot of women, we use services like Inherited Cancers Australia and the broader sort of peer support network. They are all very important. But obviously, we also work with families. And the next element of our role is to look and see, well, how could we potentially improve communication with a family? How can we support a person to disclose a genetic variant to their siblings or to their parents, or in the future to their children? And a genetic counsellor, I think, has a really important role in supporting a person feel prepared to communicate information. But first, we have to make sure that they've had a chance to process that information for themselves. Because if they're in that headspace where they've understood or come to terms with the information for themselves, they can then focus their efforts on, well, how can we now help keep others in the family safe by sharing this information? And a genetic counsellor will help come up with ideas. We provide things like family letters that can help be a conduit to share that information. I often also encourage people, when we're talking about slowly starting to communicate in an age-appropriate way, genetic information to kids. It's not about setting down and going from the first point of that conversation to the end of conversation the day they turn 18. There are plenty of opportunities throughout a child's life where they can start to learn information of, mum went to the doctor today and I just had my checkup and all is looking good. Destigmatizing information about, like I said before, it's not good news, it's not bad news. This is just really powerful information that might be relevant for the future health of others in the family. And if we can, come up with effective ways of sharing that information, often it is something that can be really, really powerful to not just look after that individual, but to potentially look after, 4 or 5 generations within that family, all who have different priorities based on their phase in life. But nonetheless, we can tackle each of those individuals as we need to. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, to ask your genetic counsellor as to, what they can do to help support you in that process.
Can I just ask Justine or Nikki about the role that you can play for men?
Yes, Leslie, you can. Traditionally, fertility conversations tend to focus on women, and obviously it takes 2 to tango, even if they're tangoing only under the gaze of an embryologist. We, in our companion network, we have men and women. We have couples who function as couples. So if not only if you were on a fertility journey and you and your husband or partner wanted to talk to a couple who had been in a similar place, we could have connected you with a couple who would, chat through with both of you. We have single women, we have same-sex couples as well who work in the space, and they've all completed a training program that a psychologist with a specialty in fertility has put together. And Sarah Roebuck is the person that we use, and we also refer people to her if they need to see someone. So very cognizant of the fact that it is not just about women. We also sometimes, interestingly, have parents contact us to say, I know that something is going on with my child and their partner. I know they won't talk to me about it though, and if I ask, they get angry with me, and so I, as the parent, don't know what is my role, how can I be supportive, how do I get them to reach out to you? And we now have some companions who will also help the parents in navigating that space, because these challenges or issues affect not just the person who is receiving the diagnosis or going through it. It's the parents, the siblings, the friends, and all the different circles of spheres of influence around them that are going on that journey as well.
I also am really trying to build up our network of male psychologists. I've recently sat down with a great guy here in Sydney and connected with 2 men in Melbourne who really work in the antenatal fertility space. So I think that's really important. I think often it's hard enough to get men to seek psychological support. So being able to speak to a man obviously has an advantage. And I should add, it just occurred to me from an AJFM perspective that whilst here today we're talking about the BRCA and, specifically Jewish inherited genetics, people contact us about a range of different genetic issues that come up now in genetic testing. And those are increasing all the time. Just in the last few weeks, I've come across different genetic conditions. So we are here for all of those, not just those specific Jewish cancers.
Are there any more questions from the audience? I've got one last question, perhaps for Leslie and Tanya. I know in the US, insurance is a really big consideration before people have testing. Can you tell us a bit about the Australian perspective?
Do you want me to go? Oh. We are so excited that as of early October, in Australia, it will no longer be legal for insurers of of income protection or life insurance to use genetic information in the calculation of risk. Until for the last 5, 7, 10 years, quite a few years, they haven't been using, insurance companies haven't been using genetic information in the assessment of risk for policies up to $500,000. But particularly if you're wanting to pay off a house, having life insurance for under $500,000 is not going to get you out of trouble. So through a huge amount of lobbying, through a colleague of ours, she's has a background in a law degree, but has worked as a genetic counsellor and actually worked with me in establishing the Gene Screen program. Jane Tiller has worked very hard as a lobbyist and worked with all different organisations to get this through the government, and it's been passed through both houses and ratified and will become law early October, that in Australia your genetic testing information can't be used in your assessment of risk of life insurance, income protection insurance, those types of products. It's never been legal to use it in private health insurance in Australia. Private health insurance is not risk-based, so it's never been an issue. So it's a very different situation overseas, particularly in the States, but it's a wonderful achievement, I think, for the Australian community that this will be in effect from October.
Do you have to disclose it?
No.
Any further questions? Otherwise, we'll leave it there and thank our panel very much.
Good. Thank you.